Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Robin Rothenberg, author of Restoring Prana, and I with me, Aggie Stewart and Melissa Campanolo. And Aggie and Melissa are both mentors for the Restore Your Prana program. They're also certified yoga therapists and Buteyko educators. In addition, Aggie is an author and a holistic writing coach. So I'm really pleased to be here with them. We're going to share a little bit about what we know and what we've experienced with breathing and working with people with their breathing as clinicians, yoga therapists, and also as mentors and guides for teachers, yoga teachers and yoga therapists wanting to learn to be a little bit more precise and informed about how they work with pranayama and the breath. So hi, Aggie. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Robin.
Great to have you here. So where should we start, do you think, with these people? What's a good starting place for talking to yoga teachers about breathing? It's a big Pandora's box, right?
It sure is. Actually, Robin, I always enjoy listening to your origin story, how you got started on this journey. It's such a powerful testament.
And informative. I think so informative. Yeah. Do you have to go into like my traumatic childhood and all that stuff? No, okay, good.
Only if you want to.
Good. So basically, I was a really lousy breather my whole life, but I didn't know it. I had a lot of chronic health issues, a lot of respiratory issues. I was one of those kids that always had an ear infection or a throat infection. I was on antibiotics more than I was not on antibiotics. And it was so bad. I mean, I think the thing that was most profound for me was when I started to get healthy, and both of my parents separately admitted to me that they always thought I would die young because I was so sickly as a kid. And it was like they weren't in cahoots. They were divorced. They didn't talk about it. They both just confessed that to me, but only after I started to get healthy. And as a parent, I was a parent at that point, and I thought, what would that have been like to have a kid that was so sick that you held that fear inside of you? Anyway, I didn't have that fear. I just thought, I just didn't know what health was. I had a lot of respiratory issues, like I said, chronic coughing so bad that my parents would dose me up with Phenergan with codeine and send me to school because I didn't have a fever or anything, but I just coughed and it sounded so awful that they didn't want the teachers to send me back down to the nurse's office, which I had the nurse's office of every school I ever went to memorized. I spent so much time there. When I started doing yoga, it was the first time that I actually had an experience of what health would be like. And I'm sure lots of you in the world of yoga know what that's about and have had similar experiences. And there was this trajectory where I got healthy, I got healthier. I still had vulnerability around with my immune system, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, those symptoms pretty much went away, but I still had this vulnerability around respiratory stuff. It got better, but it wasn't completely resolved. And then there were a number of things that coincided, but what happened was I got a really bad respiratory infection and I couldn't get better. I coughed literally for 3 months straight, like all day and all night. And I started going, I felt like flowers for Algernon. Do you guys know that? Remember Charlie? Like he gets smart and then he goes through this experiment and then he goes back, and I felt like that. Like I was unable to maintain this level of health that I had achieved. And it was really disconcerting. It was scary because I started having a lot of the fibro symptoms again and the chronic fatigue. And I was like, what's happening? So it was at that point that I went to see my naturopath, and she had me breathe into a spirometer and said, oh, I can't say it maybe on Facebook, but she said, that's really bad. It begins with an S though. And she said, you've got to do this again. And I did it again and it wasn't any better. And she said, Robin, you have asthma. And I actually think I probably should have been diagnosed with asthma like when I was 5 or something, but never was. So I never had an inhaler until that point. And so she prescribed an inhaler for me, and that was a revelation. Like, I didn't know one could breathe like that. But I had a student who was a longtime yoga student who was a chronic asthmatic, and she had started working. She started with me with yoga, and then she changed her diet, and a lot of her lifestyle stuff was getting better, but was still on a lot of medication and still ending up in the hospital with severe asthma attacks. And she had basically relieved her symptoms of asthma at the age of almost 70 using the Buteyko breathing method. And so I watched that transformation in her, and I thought that was so wonderful for her. But I had yoga and pranayama, and I didn't need it until this really bad episode that I had where I couldn't recover. And then I called her and I said, okay, Pippa, I taught you how to do yoga. Now you have to apparently teach me how to breathe. And it was pretty remarkable. From the first session with her, I experienced probably a 50% reduction in coughing. And I was able to sleep and sleep silently, which was not part of my MO. And anyway, it was revelatory. And within a week of doing the practice, my energy came up, my brain fog dissipated. And then I was like, okay, what is this? What's happening? Because I was experiencing all of these phenomenon that were associated with pranayama in the yoga texts that I had never experienced when I did pranayama, according to the pranayama, the teachers that I had in the yoga lineage. But then I was doing this very not yoga breathing, and I was experiencing this clarity of mind and this calmness and this increase of energy and health and well-being. And it just kept getting better and better and better. And so I wanted to do it more and more, and I wanted to learn more and more about it. And that took me into the deep dive into the study of respiratory physiology and studying with Patrick McEwen and hosting Patrick and doing his course, I don't know, 5 different times. And then going back to the yoga text, because I was really dismayed, thinking, how did the yogis get it wrong? Because they got it right about pretty much everything else. And I thought, how could they have gotten it wrong around breathing? And that's what really ignited my fire, because they didn't. We did. We contemporary yogis, we got it wrong. But the ancient yogis really understood that not breathing is way healthier than breathing. I don't mean like not forever breathing, because that's called death, not life. So, but while we're alive, breathing lighter, smaller, less is better than more, which is still a shock to so many people. And it takes a lot of, arm twisting, a lot to convince them, right? I mean, you guys know this, true? Because you're out there working with yoga practitioners and colleagues. And what do they say when you say you practice breathing less? Yeah, it's a hard sell.
There's like this look of they don't really know what I'm talking about. Like, well, what do you mean I'm breathing? And I'm breathing as I've been taught to breathe in yoga. What's the difference?
Yeah. So what's been the difference for you two? What I'd like to hear you share about why did you join me in this like unknown wilderness of lesser breathing?
Well, Robin, you and I were working pretty closely together when you went through that respiratory illness, and I watched the trajectory. And I watched what happened when you started to work with Pippa, and then I watched what happened when you went to study with Patrick. And when you came back, you were just on fire. And so excited about what you were learning. And I just thought, I have to learn this. I have to learn this. I'm watching Robin transform. I was having a lot of sort of a resurgence of health issues myself at the time. And So when you held your first workshop that summer after you had studied with Patrick, I think I was one of the first people to sign up. I'm like,
Were.
yeah, I have to know what this is about. And it was revelatory. It was just that first, it was a 2-weekend workshop. I came out and I stayed a week with you and I did some shadowing of your yoga therapy practice and
That's right.
yep, which was really
Hung
interesting.
out with my dad.
Hung out with
My
your
dad came to the workshop, remember?
I do. It's
I
when
was
I
my biggest fan.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what a joy. You know, the whole thing was just such a joy. And it was real eye-opening for me. I understood my chronic yawning, my chronic sighing, um, how I understood my patterns of daytime apnea that I'd never really understood before. I understood what was fanning the flames of anxiety, lifelong anxiety, which was there for lots and lots of reasons, but the way I was breathing was only just sort of fueling it. So, so it's been transformative for me to be following you, to have followed you onto this path, and to have developed a practice and to see just everything that has shaken out as a result. Health on so many levels for me. So
And for me as well, I think I was in that second training that you had Patrick out for.
Right.
And I came to the training, because I was like, oh, this is something I should learn for my clients. Like I had watched the transformation that you had gone through and heard you talk about, and I was like, oh, this is something I really can. I was just picturing my clients, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so helpful for all these people that I'm working with. And then I went through the process, and I was like, oh, actually, I have some bad breathing habits, and they were habits that I had no idea that I had. And I don't think anyone else would have recognized. I'm a really trained person for sure. But it was nothing that I had really thought of. And then after having gone through that transformative process and those practices, I started sleeping through the night, like a solid sleep through the night. It was really, like you said, revelatory. And just the level, I'm not an anxious person. I'm just not. I meditate, I do yoga, I'm pretty low key. After these practices, I realized that there was a level of stress in my system that just dissipated, that just gone. And the way that I recognized it is that I was no longer as reactive to some really small daily stresses, right? So my kids are, bopping from the curb to the street. And it's just like, I'm just very calm. Hey, can you get back on the sidewalk? Because that reactivity is gone because I've transformed my nervous system, transformed my breathing. Yeah. And we see that with the people that we work with in the program. So I have a couple of my mentees. It's been phenomenal to watch the progress with people who come in with dysfunctional breathing patterns. And then we're reading their journals, we're reading their entries, their homework entries, and they're self-reflective. And so we get to see the stress, the anxiety, and then by the end of the program, it's just gone. The triggers are still there. The things that normally cause them stress are still there, but that stress is no longer there. And it's phenomenal to watch that transformation. One of my mentees came in with long COVID, and so really, really challenging, super fatigued, no energy, wasn't really able to do much. And then just to watch her go through the program and go through the breathing practices and regain that energy. By the end of the course, she's like, Melissa, I rode my bike to work. She's like, not the close work. Like I rode my bike, an hour to work and an hour home, and I was absolutely fine. It was really, really, it's so amazing.
Yeah. And I would have to say the same with my students as well. In fact, my newest student, I've only been working with her less than 3 months. And we met last week and she's already reporting just like how much calmer she is, less reactive, more grounded. And she's kind of like amazed. She's like, can this possibly be just this bit of practice I've been doing? I'm like, well, Yes, and you'll continue to see. You'll continue to see what happens, over time. Um, and it's
Yeah,
been
I think it is profound, especially for people like myself who were highly dysfunctional breathers. I mean, I was, and I think we should break this down because we're talking about this as if everybody knows what we're talking about. But I think we should maybe do a little educational piece in here about what is the difference between functional and dysfunctional breathing. But I think that the farther away from function at the start, for me, it was so profound, just shutting my mouth and breathing through my nose. That's the first step, everybody. Breathe through your nose. Inhale and exhale through the nose, except when you're talking or eating or a few other things. And Krishnamacharya, who many of you in the world of yoga know as a preeminent yoga teacher who trained B.K. Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and Indra Devi and his son TKV Jessica Char, he said, eat less, talk less, right? And I thought it was about eating and talking, but I now understand it's about breathing. Those are the two activities where we have our mouths open the most. And when we have our mouth open, we are leaking prana, we're leaking vital energy. It throws off, to say it in Western terms, it throws off the balance between oxygen and CO2. And so another one of my mentors in the world of respiratory physiology, who is no longer with us, Lian Chaitao, he said, breathing is primarily a chemical issue. And if you understand that oxygen and carbon dioxide form the foundation for all the other chemical reactions in our body, neurotransmitters and hormones, everything that enables us to function in healthy ways, physiologically, psychologically, we have to have the right balance between oxygen and CO2. And it's not that oxygen is good and CO2 is bad. That's a misunderstanding, very much a misunderstanding. They work together, and so we need both. And in order for us to utilize the oxygen we take in, we need to have a certain normal, healthy level of CO2 in our system, or we take the oxygen in, but it stays in our bloodstream. It doesn't get into our hands, into our legs, into our brain, into the places where we need it. And so in order for that to happen, and it's complicated, the physiology, the chemistry of it, but just to understand that CO2 is a catalyst for us to become oxygenated. It enables cellular respiration to happen. And so when we breathe heavy, we breathe a lot and we exhale repetitively through the mouth, which talking is a lot of big exhales through the mouth, like I'm big breathing right now because I'm talking, right? It's an occupational hazard as a teacher. It's part of the problem. Part of what got me, I was a dysfunctional breather before I became a yoga teacher, and then afterwards, and the bigger my trainings, the longer my trainings, the longer, more hours I was talking nonstop. That was part of what sent me in that downward spiral. But opening the mouth and breathing out through the mouth, you're leaking carbon dioxide, which means your system will be less oxygenated. And over time, for a short period of time, it's no big deal. And if your levels are good to start with, you can handle, it's like there's some resilience built in the system. But if you're like me, a child who had chronic respiratory issues, was very sedentary as a child because of that, was not physically active, so wasn't getting good aerobic activity, the combination of those things set me up to have lifelong breathing problems. And this is true for a lot of children. I mean, there's been some studies that have shown that over 50% of children now are developing mouth breathing habits, which means they're setting themselves up to have anxiety, digestive issues, certainly sleep apnea, TMJ, dental problems, and malformation of their facial musculature. Big issues in life, not small things at all. They're things that all of us who care about children should take to heart and really, I mean, become aware of healthy breathing through the nose, teaching children to breathe through their nose, and emphasizing that daytime and nighttime. Very, very important. Yeah. So nose breathing light, like when we're sitting like this, there's no reason to be puffing and puffing and breathing. Like, if I start breathing like this, just in your own bodies, as you're listening and as you're watching, if I start going, are you going to think, oh, she's so chill? Or are you going to be like, oh my God, what's wrong with Robin? She seems suddenly very stressed out, right? But somehow you go to a yoga class, or you're the teacher in the yoga class, and you're like, why everybody breathe like, like you're stressed. Why are we asking people, inviting people to breathe like they're stressed when they're coming to yoga to de-stress? It's kind of nuts when you know like what's going on. I mean, I did it, okay? Like I did it for years. So that's part of, I'm just making amends for all the years that I was a really bad breathing teacher to so many people, because out of ignorance, like they say in the yoga teachings, like the problem starts with not knowing what we don't know. So the transmission of ignorance, as my teacher would say, it's pervasive in the world of yoga. And around pranayama and breathing, it's very pervasive and it's very problematic, because the effects, it's like if you take people up into a back bend and it hurts their back, they're probably going to feel like, ouch, like it come out of it. But if you are guiding people to breathe in dysfunctional ways or imbalanced ways with their physiology, they might not feel it at the end of the class. In fact, they might feel really good at the end of the class, but then they take it home and they, like my teacher said, bigger inhales and bigger exhales are really good. So I practiced big breathing all the time so that I could be de-stressed. And it was adding to my dysfunction. It was actually taking me farther and farther away from health and stability in my system. So we need to know, we need to be educated, and we need to understand these things so that when we're working with people, we're guiding them in a way that is actually promoting their health and well-being and not taking them in the opposite direction. Do you guys have anything to share about that, or anything you want to add to that conversation?
I think for me, one of the things that's been so helpful is really to understand the science. And I know that's a big part of the program, is understanding the respiratory science, because then it can inform what we're doing. And I think of the breath work that we do, it includes so much of the pranayama that we were taught in terms of the techniques. And then we're just applying those, the science and also that philosophy of less to restore the prana. And I think that that's been so helpful. I think it's often so confusing. People, when you think about Buteyko or people think about coherent breathing, they think there's like one practice to do. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I love about this program, is that it really encourages us to be aware of who we're teaching and to adapt as needed, but really respecting the science that we're aware of. And it can be so transformational.
Yeah, exactly.
And to just dovetail with what you're saying, Melissa, I find myself recently having lots of conversations with my mentees about, how our breath is changing all the time, every day. We don't want to be doing the same practice. We need to know enough about how to practice. Knowing the respiratory physiology is huge. The chemistry of it is huge, and its impact on us, how our practice is actually impacting our system, so that we can be nimble and shift and change and adapt our practice to whatever the current conditions are. And those are always shifting and changing. So
exactly.
And at the same time, having that understanding so that we can recognize our dysfunctional habits, if we happen to have one, so that transformation can take place, right? Because we can do some healthy breathing practices, But if we still have those habits and we're still mouth breathing or whatever the habit is, it's good. That's still a problem. So
Yeah.
addressing kind of what we have going on, and that's so individual. It's so for some people, it's really unique what their habit is that's causing them grief.
Exactly. I've had people who have come in who have studied Buteyko, and then they come to study with me because they're really struggling with Buteyko. And Buteyko, for those of you who don't know, it's a breathing method that was developed by Dr. Konstantin Buteyko, who's a Russian physician who observed that in the critical care unit of the hospital, as he was monitoring people, that the people who breathed harder and faster seemed to have many more complications and die sooner, and that the people whose breathing was calmer and slower, they seemed to fare better. And so he asked this, I think, very profound question, which is the disease driving the breath, or is the breath driving the disease? And his summation was that the breath was driving the disease, which is an interesting way of looking at it. So then he started investigating that, and it developed this technique about reducing the volume of breath. So I've had people who have come to me having tried Buteyko and found it to be very beyond challenging, just not possible. And in my assessment of them, their volume is very small, but their respiratory rate off the charts, 24 breaths a minute, like really, really fast breathing, not big quantity. And so the focus on breathing less, just what that was doing was actually bumping up their respiratory rate even more and making them feel more anxious and more tense. And so working with them with more of like what you were talking about, coherence breathing, which is more about slowing the respiratory rate down and taking them in that direction, but actually letting them breathe a little more fully, but slower. And for me, I had like every bad breathing habit there was. So mouth breathing, paradoxical breathing, which is reversed, instead of the diaphragm moving down on inhale, is moving up, which is a trauma response with breathing. So mouth breathing, paradoxical breathing, and rapid breathing. So big and rapid breathing. My breath was about 20 breaths a minute when I started. And I found that what really shifted me significantly with my breathing was to spend some of the time, like half of my practice, focusing on bringing the volume down, the other half of my practice bringing the rate down. And I had to really work both sides of it because the problem was on both sides. And so that opened my eyes that it's not just volume, because some people, their volume is small, but their rate is high. So, and then that it's more of the tension because of chronic chest breathing and all of the muscular tension that creates in the neck and the jaw, and, headaches and all of that, elevating their nervous system, putting them into sympathetic drive, which is driving their breath rate and their heart rate up higher. And so working on the biomechanics, it's a real combination, right? Mind and the body, and then the chemistry of it. And so it takes a lot to learn. Like I took Patrick's training again and again because I was trying to understand it fully so that I could convey it to my yoga colleagues in a way that was coherent. And I still get tripped up on the physiology, as you guys know, because it's complicated and I'm not a physiologist. So
Robin, can you talk a little bit by what you mean by less breathing? I think you covered it there. And really, so it's a matter of volume, but also that rate of respiration.
Rate. Yeah. So there's what's known as minute volume. How much you breathe over the course of a minute. And it's a combination of how much you take in per breath. Like, we don't think about it, but it's a healthy breath is like 5 liters a breath, right, per minute. But how do we know how much we're breathing? It's a difficult thing to gauge. But I guarantee you that if your mouth is open and you're gulping breath in and you're sighing breath out, you're breathing more than 5 liters of breath per minute. If you breathe through your nose, it's already reducing the amount and sort of regulating how much your volume is. So that's the first thing. Just breathe through your nose. It'll cover a lot. And then respiratory rate, how many breaths per minute. So you multiply the respiratory rate towards the with the tidal volume, how much you breathe per breath, and you get your minute volume. So in most pranayama practices, in most yoga classes, the rate is addressed. Like, let's slow the breath down, which is nice. However, people are already breathing really big. You have them breathe big and slow, bigly and slowly, then it's just going to increase the minute volume. You're not going to actually, by slowing it down, you're just going to increase the volume. And so the minute volume is not going to change. And Dr. Buteyko really addressed that it's getting the minute volume down. And he looked at it more through the lens of volume itself as opposed to respiratory rate. I'm a big fan of both, and working with the mind and working with the nervous system, and looking in the biomechanics. I think it's it's the whole deal.
Yeah, and Robin, I'm glad you brought up biomechanics, because that's the other piece. It's a biochemistry for sure, and then the biomechanics and structure, like literally having the infrastructure to support healthy functional breathing, which is as much a matter of muscle development and redevelopment oftentimes, in the key areas.
Yeah, and this is where I think people often don't realize how much the breath is driving their chronic neck pain, their TMDJ, their back pain, their chronic headaches. Like, people don't necessarily, and then yoga teachers often aren't aware either. So they're trying to give they give this great stretch or strengthen or whatever, release, somatic work, which is lovely. But meanwhile, the person is 20 to 30,000 times a day, hyper activating their levator and their upper traps and their scalenes, right? And their pecs, and everything is tense and tight. And at the same time, as the accessory muscles are being called into play with every breath, the diaphragm is getting underutilized. The diaphragm always is involved in breathing. It's a matter of how much diaphragmatic movement is there and who is the diaphragm calling upon to work with it. So I always say diaphragm is a team player. It likes to work in tandem with other muscles. If it's not trained, as it naturally is, to work with the abdominal muscles and synchronize with them, it's going to call on the accessory muscles of the chest. And over time, doing that 20, 30,000 times a day creates a lot of tension. And at the same time, a lot of weakness at the core, which can contribute significantly to lower back pain, to hip pain, to neck and shoulder pain, and certainly jaw tension.
And when I think about too, all the lifestyle issues that impact our breathing as well, I mean, even just, all our various devices that we're constantly hunched over, people working at desks, all of that, a lot of sitting, and just contributing to poor posture, and how posture affects how we're breathing and how we're accessing our diaphragm. Exactly.
I mean, in my book, I write about this in the book, and many of you who've worked with me, you've heard me say that one of the things that happened while in the process of writing the book is that I fell in love, and I fell in love with the diaphragm. I didn't really understand the diaphragm till it really happened. There was a moment, I can still picture it, where I was reading about it, and then I brought up an image of it on Google, and I saw everything that goes through the diaphragm, the aorta, the vena cava, like the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system is all innervated through, like all the digestive organs sitting there, the heart right on top of it. It's amazing. See, I'm still I did. Actually, don't laugh. Writer to writer, I had to stop, and I wrote an ode to the diaphragm. I did, and it became chapter 6, the center point of the book, because I was like, oh my God, this thing is magnificent. We should be organizing our entire asana practice, our postural practice, around the diaphragm, and making sure the diaphragm is in its optimal position to breathe us while we're in every pose. And how would that be, as opposed to stacking, the hips on top of the heels and the shoulders on top of the pelvis as if there's nothing important in between, like all our vital organs and our diaphragm and our lungs and our heart. Let's just go pelvis to shoulder, forget the middle, right? And then the head and the positioning of the ears, as if we're, like a skeleton as opposed to a human being. But anyway, so that's, yeah, like you can see, I still love the diaphragm. I believe in the diaphragm. Yeah, but I mean, it's amazing because in watching people when they shift out of chest breathing and become abdominal diaphragmatic breathers, watching them transform. I mean, that to me is one of the most transformative pieces. And it's probably the piece that I am most divergent from the traditional Buteyko method, because it's what I teach first. And probably because I'm a yoga therapist, and so I come in through the body as a doorway into transforming and understanding the self. So I just find that getting people breathing abdominal diaphragmatically immediately downshift, it's like, right, gets them into more of a parasympathetic state. They're calmer. Their breath is slower and lower and more relaxed just by doing that, before we start monkeying around with breathing less, which can sometimes feel constraining to people. And I find that I have much less pushback with the reduction of breath when people are breathing abdominal diaphragmatically and their nervous system chills out to begin with, then saying, okay, just titrate it back 10%, just breathe a little bit lighter, just breathe with it's just a little delicate thread of breath in and out, just the softest wave on a calm lake, right? Just like that. And people get it and they're like, oh, this feels good, right? This feels good. This doesn't feel like I'm being restricted or constrained from taking a breath. It just feels like I'm relaxed.
Robin, when you were talking earlier too about breathing 24/7, I know one of the things that I found really helpful was learning how to tape at night. And yeah, exactly. It took some getting used to. And as I work with my students, we have lots of conversations around how to do it, especially if there's some anxiety around, putting tape on the mouth at night. Legitimately. And so there are various strategies that we work with to do that. But I know that for them, and like for myself, taping at night has again been part of the transformation. It helped me relearn how to breathe with my mouth closed at night, and to keep it clear, that it actually helps my nose stay more clear. Even when I
know that shocks people. I always say, well, let's see, I've been taping for about 10 years now, and I've had multiple colds and COVID, and I'm alive. So apparently one somehow with tape on, I managed to survive through the night.
You want to talk about the kind of tape that you use?
Yeah,
I do. I highly recommend duct tape. No, I don't know. I say that because people ask me all the time. They're like, well, what do you use? Duct tape? It's like, why would you, are you masochistic? Like, why would you do that? No, so paper tape, like you would use on your skin, right? Something nice and gentle. And I use hypoallergenic tape. I like Nextcare or 3M Micropore tape, which you can get in abundance through Amazon. So it's cheap. And you can always have tape. You should never leave home without your tape. When I travel, I take two things with me, my tape and my buckwheat pillow. I never leave home without those two.
Yeah. Essentials, travel essentials.
Exactly.
And there are other taping devices too, Robin. Can you speak a little bit about those for people?
Yeah, so my breathing teacher, Patrick McEwen, you've heard me mention him. I can't say enough about him. He is one of the most wonderful human beings and non-yoga yogis that I've ever met in my life. Truly a kind-hearted and generous teacher in person. And anyway, he developed the Oxygen Advantage program and has written, I think, 9 books now on breathing. He's very a very strong proponent of getting children breathing well, because he sees what a difference it makes in terms of their lifelong development and health. So he developed a tape that can go around the mouth as opposed to over it. It's kind of, you think of it like it has spandex in it. So it will hold your mouth closed, but if you have to open your mouth to like call out, mom or whatever, then you can do that. You're not restricted. And that has, and you can get that on his website or even on Amazon. The Buteyko tape. Is it called? Does it have a specific?
Myotape, I think. Isn't it
That's it. Myotape. Maybe Janelle can put that in the chat. myotape.com. Myotape. And so that's a lovely option. And then for some people, just the tape or the skin doesn't, like their skin doesn't take to having any kind of gum or anything on them, or if they've got facial hair, then sometimes it doesn't stick well. So there are chin straps that can also work. And there's also some it's like a lip glue that you can put if you stick your tongue in and or dab some water in, it melts right away, but it'll just keep the lips closed. So there's some options to tape. The point is it's something so that when you are unconscious, you're not going like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you just keep breathing through your nose.
And there are strategies that we use too, Robin. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for people who have some anxiety about taping at night, things that they can do to tape?
Oh yeah, I mean, I recommend I always watch the reaction of my clients, and there's some who are like, wow, taping, like that just sounds really weird. And then there's some are like, oh my God, no. And often there's trauma, there's something with, pillow over the face or whatever. Like, I totally respect the psychological reasons why people might have an aversion to taping. And some of these other options are a better way to go. But also people can acclimate themselves by taping during the day when they wash the dishes or they're watching TV or they're on the computer and they're not going to be talking to anybody. They're doing some activity other than that, and just get used to having the tape on. And sometimes that's all that's needed to where they can tolerate it at night. And, start with like 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's a great thing with kids while they're doing screen time. Like that can be kind of the trade-off. While they're doing screen time, they tape so that they're not sitting there on their devices like that, right? At least they're functional breathing while they're on their devices. Right? It's a good thing.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed, we have the monthly Sangha gatherings as part of the Restore Your Prana program. And
Yes.
One of the things I often enjoy is people talk about their experience with the tape. So I remember there was one of our grads who says she tried taping during the program and it didn't really make a difference, so she didn't do it. And then she had COVID. And man, did she start taping, and she was so grateful, and it made such a difference. And it's interesting to watch kind of, that evolution, that people try it for a week and see, maybe it makes a difference, maybe not. But just to hear people's experiences, that's one of the things I really enjoy about the monthly gatherings, is these little bits. It's like, during the program, this wasn't a big thing for me. But after the program, I got COVID, and this practice that didn't really speak to me during the program was vital for me getting through COVID and feeling better.
Absolutely.
So maybe it would be good for us to talk a little bit about the program, the Sangha gatherings every month, how we work.
Let's do that. And then let's field some questions, because I know there's been some good questions that have come in through the chat. So let's kind of do a little synopsis. You guys want to talk about the program? What do you like doing? You're both mentors for the program. You've been pretty much there since the beginning. What do you enjoy the most about mentoring?
I adore the one-on-one work and watching students transform. All those aha moments, things that they just didn't realize before. So this increased awareness of how they're breathing, the development of subtle awareness, interoception, how a key that is to really understanding when they're falling into unhealthy breathing patterns. And we all do it. I mean, it's just part of being human. We get stressed. our minds elsewhere, we default, you know,
Yeah.
so it's being able to recognize how we're feeling in our bodies and in our minds that leads us back to, okay, how am I breathing? What do I need to do? Or how can I, you know, do a breathing practice at this point that will kind of help me to shift the way I feel right now. So it's watching that, though, all those aha moments. And I love to teach. I mean, we're teaching what you have put together so beautifully in the book, Robin, which is this marriage of Western science and yogic teaching and science. And it's so beautifully done. And I have to say personally, and I watch it in my students, the way the yoga teachings really come alive. All of a sudden, it's like they make sense, and they make sense in our bodies, not just in our heads. And it's a beautiful sort of awakening to see.
So can we talk about the EBA,
Sure. Yeah.
the energetic bank account? Yeah, because this is so critical. You know, when I wrote the book, my publisher wanted me to call it yoga for the respiratory system. And I said, yeah, that's not going to fly. I'm not, because it's not about the respiratory system. It's about all the systems of the body. The breath is about everything. I'm not going to say it's just about the respiratory health. And I was playing with the title and playing with the title. And then when I was in Costa Rica and I was writing it, I realized it's really about prana. It's not even about breath. It's really about our energy system and the teachings around how we take in and how we put out energy and how much time we allow for digestion and assimilation, and what we have really in abundance to put out as opposed to sort of pulling from the dregs. That this is such a key, the whole topic of the prana, the 5 pranas or the 5 winds, about the vayus, is such a key piece of this whole topic of breath and how much breath we take in and how much breath we put out, and how important it is to not be breathing all the time, either in or out, but to allow for the pauses, which is really the essence of pranayama. Is that this was the big aha I got when I went back from the Buteyko training and had been working with these strong breath suspensions. And I went back and studied the original text, and they all emphasize it, kumbhaka, the breath holds. It was never about inhale and exhale. It's always about breath retention and breath suspension, and breath suspension being the way to take us in the direction of samadhi. Breath retention for energizing and a variety of other things. But in terms of going into those deeper states of consciousness and that state of internal stillness and quiet is about breath suspension. And so bringing that in and helping people to understand that piece of the yoga teachings mirrored by the breath, and using the breath as a way of monitoring how they're putting out energy and how they're taking in energy, and how important it is to not always be putting out or taking in. And I just feel like that I always say chapter 2, if you only read one chapter of the book, please read chapter 2, because that's the essence of it, is really about managing our prana. And that's what people want, is that sense of mastery. Like, I want to feel like I have energy, and like I'm, I wake up and I'm ready to go. And when it's time for bed, I can go to sleep. And it's not this chaotic, like I don't want to wake up in the morning and I can't go to sleep at night. And that is it's really a pranic question. And there's such an imbalance in our culture. So I feel like that's a key piece. And the personal practice piece of the program, I think, is where the evolution really happens. People come in because they want to teach pranayama well for others, but I hope what they find is that it's really about themselves. It's really, they've got to do it for themselves. There's no going through this program without doing your own personal work. It's really, you got to take it on and in for yourself before you can, in an authentic way, share it with somebody else and motivate them and inspire them to transform, because it's not easy. It's not easy to change a pattern, a habit that you engage in 20 to 30,000 times a day. There's no way to be conscious of all of those breaths, but if you can become conscious of even 10% of those breaths, you can change so much. Yeah. So So they meet with you and you love to meet with them. And Melissa, circle
and
back to you.
Yeah, and so of course, watching the personal transformation is amazing, but also watching people make the practices their own. You know, because all of the practices are so unique, and then you see people just really dive in and then find the way that works for them, and just the magic that occurs when they're able to do that. It's so beautiful. And it's such a deep dive. So you talk about the energetic bank account, which I think everyone needs to know about and explore. But it's amazing that there are things throughout the entire program that are like that. And I'm sometimes surprised, like, well, you know, we'll come to the tongue exercises and people will be writing about the tongue exercises. They're like, this is revolutionary. And it's, you know, and you're like, it's the tongue. I wouldn't have thought that the tongue was the thing, but it's huge, and it makes a huge difference. And just to watch people go through each of, you know, some things they go through and it's like, oh, that doesn't really apply to me. And it doesn't. And then sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, this is so essential. And then we've got different ways to work with it. And we have the ancillary folder within the program. So you have not only the book, but you've got the ancillary videos that have tons of yoga practices that to help you explore some of the stuff that's talked about in the book. And it's just slightly different. And that's so helpful and so supportive. And then you get to meet with your mentor one-on-one on Zoom. And then it's really individualized, right? And we can really think about, okay, what is your individual habit? How does this practice work for you? Let's do this practice together. What did you notice? How do we need to adjust it so it did work for you if it didn't? And I think that's such the beauty of the program. And I have to say, I really have appreciated with most of my mentees such a drive for learning, to see them dive into this stuff, because I grew up in the Vini Yoga tradition. I've been practicing Vini Yoga for 20 years. So a lot of this, when I was reading, it's like, oh, I know this. Like, I know the philosophy. Like this is home base for me. But for a lot of people, that's not true. And so to go through and learn a little bit about the Yoga Sutras and a little, learn a little bit about the this and then that, and it makes such a difference. It's just lovely to see that desire for knowledge, right? People dive in. It's beautiful.
It is. And I certainly experienced that at the Sangha meetings, the monthly Sangha meetings, where all the cohorts and grads and alums, everybody can come together. And I do most of them. Sometimes Aggie, Melissa, and some of the other mentors run it when I've got, I'm out of town or traveling or something. But they bring their questions. We practice together. Sometimes we do little breakout sessions. But the enthusiasm for what they're learning, and then the connection with each other, because this is really, we're still a little bit on the fringes in the world of yoga with this breathing. And so sometimes it can feel like a little bit isolated. So I think it's important that we have this like EYT, RYP, Essential Yoga Therapy, Restore Your Prana, family, that we can come together and have conversations where we all are speaking in the same language and have the same level of understanding about the yoga teachings and the Western science behind it. So I'm wondering if we should, Janelle, do you have a couple of questions that you think would be useful for us to?
So I see a couple of questions in the chat. So one of them is, I'm just curious about the glue with the lips. Do you know, is there a certain glue that you've noticed that works?
The lip glue. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Lip seal? No. It's in my book, actually.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's in chapter 5. I know that because it's on the tongue and the lips, and nose breathing versus mouth breathing. That's chapter 5. And you can get all the fun tongue exercises there. Not that that's exhaustive by any means. I've learned so much more about the tongue and the jaw since then. I have to write another book.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one, I have to say.
Yeah.
Tiffany says that she's asking about the lip glue, but she says she's had several Parkinson's clients ask about how to keep the tape on because they have trouble because of drooling.
Yeah.
And so she's thinking the lip glue might be, but I'm thinking the glue,
or even the chin strap might even be a better, just keep it away from the moisture piece with the mouth.
Yeah.
And they could try myotape too.
Yeah, oh, yeah, because yeah, that's helpful. Someone was asking about if the program is available in person and if there are mentors all over.
There are mentors all over, and it's an international program. We have literally had people in multiple places in Europe who have been through the program, and as well as Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Indonesia. What am I missing?
Okay.
Where are you? Teen's here. Don. Let's see, I think Indonesia, yeah, Bali maybe, I can't remember. Anyway, so our mentors will meet with you whenever we find mentors who will meet with you whenever you can meet. So time zone is not an issue. It is all online, although just to put a little carrot out there, I am planning an in-person RYP retreat for those who would like to come out. I haven't planned it yet, but it's in the works. And so I'm hoping to get a group from all different cohorts, and we can spend the whole, like a long weekend practicing together, like doing like long, strong practices together and really steep ourselves, and also practice our teaching skills and verbal cues and what works and what doesn't work in terms of teaching methodologies, and share stories and just hang out together, breathing well.
So Robin, I know we've only got just a couple of minutes. There's a question here that's, I think, really important. And I know I get this question a fair amount as well. And it's about Andrew Weil's 4-7-8 breath.
Yeah.
And why, for example, he does the exhale through the mouth and not the nose. And how does
I think that's a great question to ask him. I love, people ask me, why does this person do that? I actually, I mean, you guys know, I know things, but I don't really know why these people do what they do. I know why I don't. That's all I can say is that's not how I would teach the breath. And I can back up why I don't teach it that way, but I can't tell you why he believes it's a good thing. Obviously he does, and he's a really smart guy and well-researched, so he's got his philosophy and reasons for doing what he's doing. There's a lot of, just like everything out there, there's a lot of varying opinions. I believe that if you are educated, like I've come to understand and appreciate some of the really intense ratios that were given in pranayama that I thought were crazy. I don't see them as crazy now. I understand them. I also understand who they might be useful for and who they could like send off into like the deep end. So, it's like be informed, be educated, right? That's the most important thing, not getting something right or learning some kind of dogmatic idea that this is the way to teach breath. There's a lot of usefulness in coherent breathing, resonant breathing, which is like, has to do with heart rate variability. And if people are hyperventilators, that's not going to be the first place to go. But if people have anxiety, they're not hyperventilators, and not everybody is, only like about 1/10 of the population truly is in a chronic state of hyperventilation. But some people, far more than that, are sort of on the edge. But you have to know assess where people's starting point is. And then you have to understand and have enough information and education about the breath to know how to mix and match and put it together in a way that's beneficial and healthy for this person. It's not about learning a breath technique and then plastering it on everybody. That's just not wise.
And then Robin, there's another really good question about how the program is trauma informed.
Well, it has to do with breathing. And so, trauma affects the breath. And so, customizing and empowering, like the whole process is really a self-empowerment process of using your own internal awareness and observing how your state of mind, your state of being, your perception of the world is affecting you through the lens of the breath, and coming to know yourself better, which is a very much a place where you can then make wiser choices, healthier, safer choices for yourself, and also build your resilience, which is the way that I have experienced people really stepping out of fear and into a place where they can stand solid and comfortable in their own skin, because they're owning what they're choosing to do with their life and how they're choosing to perceive and take in experiences from the outside, and knowing how to put their boundaries up. So I feel like learning more about the breath, it's like it's a direct line into where a lot of that trauma is held and lodged, and starting to unwind it from the inside. That's not dependent on anybody on the outside doing anything different. It's really about coming into a place of stability within yourself.
I'm really
And
glad.
can I add to that? One of my mentees is a trauma-informed yoga teacher. And she has taken this work into the prisons where she's doing trauma-informed work, and she's gotten funding to do that in England, which is pretty phenomenal. So I also have a mentee who comes to this with a Kundalini yoga background. So it's interesting because we all come to it from our own yoga family.
Exactly.
And then we learn the science and the philosophy, and we make it work with what we already know, and it just informs it and makes it stronger.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other piece I wanted to add to that too is that it's not a dogmatic program. It's an informative program, and it's an experientially based program. So what we do as mentors when we're working with someone individually is really working on their personal practice in a way that addresses what's going on for them and how they understand the breath through the lens of their own experience.
And I just want to read this from the chat because I think it's kind of fun. Diane added, she loves Somnifix on Amazon. As a dentist, she is noticing that her open bite from childhood mouth breathing is closing. Her front teeth never touched before and now do. Incredible how malleable we are, even as adults. Always hope for change and growth. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Diane.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Aggie. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you behind the scenes, Janelle, for running the tech side. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be back on the 12th, or I will be back on the 12th with a couple of the students from the program. And we'll hear what they have to say about it. And our next launch will be on April 23rd. On our website, essentialyogatherapy.com. You can learn more about the program. You can email me, and I'll get back to you and talk to you about, your interest in it and how to help you get started. We really try and make it work for people financially with payment plans. My interest is in getting this information, this education out there to the point where, there's like that tipping point, and breathing is just taught from a very informed and educated and scientific way. And we're offering people pranayama practices that are really well suited for them and supporting them in health and well-being. So join the Breath Revolution. It's a good club to participate in. Become a member. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Namaste.
Namaste.